Hello, hello, and welcome to U Media Chicago Speak on It, a series of author talks virtually connecting teams to successful writers for conversations about books, creativity, writing, and more. I am Alex, your friendly neighborhood teen librarian, and I am so excited to welcome our guests today. Ann Na was born in South Korea and grew up in San Diego, California. Her first novel, A Step from Heaven, was a National Book Award finalist and won the Prince Award, as well as many other illustrious awards. Her most recent book, The Place Between Breaths, explores family and mental illness. She lives in Vermont and teaches at the Vermont College of Fine Arts in the Writing for Children and Young Adults MFA program. So thank you so much for joining us, Anna.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Excellent. And for those watching live, we want your questions as well. So any questions you have, go ahead and put them in the chat and we will make sure that we ask them. So let's start at the beginning. When did you start writing?
I started writing really late in life. I know that a lot of writers have been writing for their entire lives, but I, as an immigrant, came to the United States when I was about 4 years old, and the expectation that my parents had and the role models, honestly, that I had were basically doctors and lawyers and professionals. And so that was kind of the track that I was put into. Um, so my idea of what writers were just magical people that lived in books, and I read books voraciously as a child and growing up. And when people ask me, who are you, I really, like, in my heart of hearts, I am a reader. Like, my first love is reading. And so I never really connected this idea of being a writer and love of reading as something that could be my career and passion and goal. So I went off to college to become a doctor and really did not want to be a doctor. And quickly, and the whole time I was just taking literature classes, like just trying to sneak in times to read. And so it wasn't until the end of college that I discovered through another children's literature class that I really loved writing. And so at that point, it became just like a tiny little seed of hope and a dream. And I finally applied to an MFA program. And that is when kind of like this little seed went to, like, okay, this is what you're doing, and you're putting money down and telling your parents. And so that's when I decided that's when I wanted to be a writer. So much later in life, but always a big lover of stories and books.
That's so great to hear, because I feel like we do hear a lot the like, oh, I was writing my whole life, and that's awesome, but it's like you can come to it later. You can, you don't have to know when you're age or 18 what you want to do. You can discover it later, and that's great.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I tell my students who get really stressed sometimes is like, you know what? Writing is long in your life. Like, if you are a writer, you know this, and it can always happen whenever as a mom, I have two kids. There are moments when I would much rather be writing, but the reality is they need me now as a mother, and they're going to leave, but writing is always going to be with me. And so I try to reassure my writing the folks that I advise that, like, it's so integral and it's so part of your identity. So if you need to mom or be a sister or be a caretaker or a daughter, however that works out, don't like put that additional stress on top of you, because being an artist is hard enough sometimes. So know that this is who you are, and it'll be in your life.
Yeah. So what kinds of things did you read when you were young? Did you read Korean books also in addition to American literature?
No, so I immigrated when I was 4 years old. And so even though my first language is Korean, my first reading experience is in English. And so when I started to read, my father actually signed me up for one of those book of the month, club things, and the book would land on your doorstep. And I was still too young to really read those bigger chapter books. And so I remember drawing in them And later on, when I went back to go find The Little Princess and Secret Garden and all these books that came to my doorsteps, I would find crayon scribblings, and I was like, "Ooh, bad child." But I went back and I read them, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I love these stories." And so it wasn't one of those things, it's just my father signing me up for the book of the month club. And once I discovered reading, I would go to the library, and I was that kid with like the stack that's beyond your face. And I'd be like, okay. So yeah, no, absolutely love the library.
Awesome. We love to hear that. Did Korean literature ever become a part of your life later? Like, is that something that you sought out or not so much?
Sometimes in translation, I get books, but honestly, the reality is here in the United States, and this is one of the things that I'm like, bad US. We do not, and I feel like the publishing industry is starting to catch up a little bit, but we are the poorer country in terms of how much literature is translated.
Mhm.
And I was at the National Book Awards last year talking to Lisa Lucas. The fact that they have now an award that honors translation is huge, because in other countries, they translate so much more than we do. And I think this is where we are so literature poor that we don't know what the world literature market really looks like without those translated books. And translation is an art form. It is really, like, really good translators not only give us a story, give us a certain amount of voice, but elevate and really try as hard as it is to bridge that gap between language, which I think is just phenomenal and such a gift.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more works in translation or works from people outside of the US I read, the more I've realized how like different cultures shape their stories differently.
Oh my
And so it's
gosh.
and it's when we don't study that, then we just think, oh, that's different. Our reaction is like, oh, the pacing is off. The pacing isn't off. It's just, it's just different. And so yeah, I totally agree. We need to.
Yes, I agree. As folks who live in a world, in a country that has so much access to so many different things, the fact that we don't have works in translation is just really, it's egregious. I feel like as a writer, I want to read more. I want to read African stories. I want to read Asian stories. I want to read South American stories. Like there's just such a wealth of literature out there that we just don't understand.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So what does so like if you're sitting down to write, do you have like rituals or things to kind of get you in the mindset? Or is it just I have 5 minutes while my kids are napping? Or, like what does kind of a writing session look like for you?
So, one of the things that I definitely do is try to listen to music. And I have different music that is very central to different books that I'm working on. So, my last book, The Place Between Breaths, the music, it's not even music. What I was listening to was train tracks and the sounds of trains coming in to the station or leaving, like hearing the clanking and the mechanism and the whistle and all, because the book had one of the central motifs and themes, because the protagonist is going insane. But the thing that she would hear was kind of just, she would hear the trains from far, near, like various sounds of the trains. And so I would have to write basically what the train felt and sounded like. And so I would play different soundtracks of trains, and I would be like, and the screeching and the metal and the, like it just went on and on. So that was one of the things that I would have to do to try and get into the story, was to kind of, it was like a haunting. The train was constantly haunting her mind. So that was something that would help me get into that mindset of just being haunted and the sounds that were not there. For other books, I do the same thing. I kind of like, if I hear one particular song, it immediately takes me back to the story, or it takes me to an emotion. And so often soundtracks, music, a particular sound is a shortcut to an emotional state that I need to be in order to do the writing. So that's part of my writing life, is that I find exactly the right kind of music that I need to feel. Um, And then after that, sometimes I'll turn it off. Sometimes it stays. It just depends on where I am. And then once I'm in the story, then I can write. I generally try and save a few hours during the day to like say these are my work hours, but oftentimes, that can get interrupted. I will say this though. So based on being a mom, I've learned I can't draft when my kids need me. So September is kind of a needy month, but like October into November, right before Thanksgiving, I'm good. So I can draft then. And then like Christmas is done. I'm like in cookie mode. I'm in present mode. It's like, no, December is like, I do not punish myself for not writing in December because there's so many other things to do. But I will say kind of May into June, parts of like March into April. So there's certain months where nothing is happening and they're just in school. And that's when I can get a lot of work done. So first drafts are often written during those months where things are a little bit more quieter. There aren't birthdays or holidays. And then I can actually get some work done.
Do you draft things quickly, or do you have to like do some of it and then come back to it?
Oh, I am a total daydreamer. I'm one of those writers that don't want to sit down. I can find all sorts of reasons for why I should be up and doing other things, but it's obviously writing can't happen unless you sit down and do the work.
Yep.
So it's I really have to like make myself do the work. It's a little bit difficult. I love it when I can get my head into it. And once I'm into it, it's kind of like exercising, then I want to go back into it. And so it's really hard to pop out and come back in. So I definitely try to schedule my time that way so I know when I can write. But I love to sit there and I daydream. A lot of my stories come to me when I am thinking about daydreaming, but then structuring novels. So a lot of writing happens when I'm just kind of on my own and washing dishes and things like that. And I'm trying to figure out what's the structure for this. So my last book deals with mental illness. It came right after my brother passed away from mental illness. And it was something that was really haunting me. And so I read a lot of nonfiction books around what I believed he was suffering from. I wanted to try to understand what was happening with him. And so I started to write it. It was so depressing. I had to stop. I kept coming back to it though for 10 years, like coming back and trying to figure out what is the structure for this book. And then I realized that I wanted the structure to be a DNA strand, that there were four different stories within this story. And I wanted it to be told past, present, and future in the way that our lives are influenced by the past. We are in our present, but we're also thinking about the future, the way that mental illness works. It is genetically coded oftentimes. You live with it in the present, but you can also, it lives on in the future. So knowing my family's mental history then helped me think about my brothers. And so I felt like this was a story that needed to be told in terms of how genetics works, in terms of how we think about our interactions with our family members and things like that. So that took a long time, it took years. And then when I got it, I was like, yes. And then I could actually write the novel the way that I wanted it to. But up until then, it was just kind of fragments and pieces and ideas that I had.
I think that's also so helpful to hear that like some of these projects need a lot of time to like, we talked to Laura Ruby a couple of years ago, and her book 13 Doorways was the same, and she'd been working on it for like over a decade. And it's like, so it's so reassuring, I think, to young writers and young creative people that like it's okay, you can play and like come back to it.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing is, some stories are meant to be just, I have one book, my third one just bah, it was like, okay, it just came out. That never happens. Like once in a while, yes, okay, but it really rarely happens. And a lot of the books, so when I was working on The Place Between Breaths, The Fold, which was my third novel, I was working with both at the same time. And one was much easier than the other. And I asked my editor, like, which one would you like? And I'd written a couple kind of more darker stories. And she was like, let's go with the light. I was like, all right. So it was easy to go down that road, but they're all different. They're like babies, right? They take their time, they do what they want. You just have to trust that they will come out when they want to come out. And some books just take longer, for whatever reason.
Yeah. And I was actually going to ask about the structure of a place between breaths, because it is so, I didn't think of that being like a DNA strand, because it's so like non-linear. When you were drafting that, did you formulate it chronologically or in the order that we read it, or, like, how did that come out?
So I did know that the main strand, which is the present, which is Grace's story, was her descent basically into madness, and knowing that this is something that's probably happening to her because she's smart enough and has enough information based on the fact that her mother suffered from it, that this is a genetic disease. And so I knew that she kind of had a feeling about it. The really interesting thing that I discovered when I was doing all the research around schizophrenia was this really interesting phase. It's called the prodrome phase, where people talk about it as though you are standing on a bridge. And because you are so cognizant of your life up until that point, to understand that your life after this point is going to be now completely different, that you are in a very special place of being able to see not only your past, but also your future coming. And so that's why the train, it was like, it's coming. It's, that she knows that this is something she's going to start to suffer from, that she doesn't quite know how to deal with it in terms of the decision or decisions that she needs to make, and also understanding that she's very much alone, but she doesn't know that yet, right? So this like haunting image of being able to recognize what your life is going to be like and the choices that you may or may not have was one of the pivotal questions for me when I was thinking about the book, because I think it's just heartbreaking for many of the folks who suffer from mental illness. If you know that it's in your genetics, if you know it's something that you are particularly susceptible to, and the heartbreaking rate of suicides in our young people's lives, it was just something that I had to explore. Like, as dark as it was, the fact that my brother suffered from it, the fact that he died from it, it was just something I was like, this is reality. Like, I don't want to gloss this over. I don't want to sit here and pretend like it doesn't exist. There's so many young people struggling with this. And so it was really important for me to write that novel. And at the same time, I was like, how do I find hope? Because it needs to have some hope. And it took me a really, really long time to find. So a DNA strand, and I was telling it in seasons, it was like three, 10, past, present, future, but then there's 4 seasons. And so every tense had a season, but then there was this lap, and I was like, what am I doing? There are 4 seasons, but only past, present, and future. So what's that last season about? And so it took me a really long time. And then I was like, that is the season of like, I don't know. It is hope. It is faith. It is, I don't know what life is going to bring. It is that thing, that X factor that we don't understand. And so that's when it just made sense. It's about love. It's about wanting. It's about needing to help others. It's whatever comes into your life that does not make sense, but you believe in it. And so that was the last season, and it was a voice of love, and it was love from father, love from this new love interest, it was love from mother, and all those voices that say believe and have hope and have faith and hold on to something. And I know everything seems messed up and the fates are stacked against you and your medical history is stacked against you, but there's still people who do the cancer research, who do all the stuff to help people who are in need. I mean, it's phenomenal if you have that kind of ray of hope and faith that you can do something in this world. And so that was my 4th season, and I was like, yes, and that was spring.
That's awesome. I love that. And I feel like that, yeah, that's one of the things I feel like that marks young adult literature from like adult literature is this element of hope, and that like even in the darkness there's always this like it's going to be okay. We don't always know how, but like, it's going to be okay. It's something that I love about YA in particular. Is that
Me too, because their emotions are huge. I remember that time
big.
so vividly. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And it's a time when I think it's like everything is so important and you still don't have total control over your life. Like in the best of circumstances, you're still like, you have to go to school and your parents tell you when to be home, and it's, but we put so much pressure on young people.
Absolutely. It's one of those times they're all worried about so many things that are coming up. They're not quite adults. They can't control things, right? But at the same time, they're supposed to control their hormones. They're supposed to control school. They're supposed to get ready for the future by going to college. They have so many things on their plates. And yet they're the least equipped to really be able to handle it in many ways. And so you see the struggles that they face. I have an 18-year-old who was supposed to go to college. I know. And she kept hoping, and she wouldn't hear about a gap year. She wanted to believe that maybe she could get there. And so the reality was nobody thought that she was really going to get there. But at the same time, we couldn't poo-poo on her yum, like don't yuck on my yum, right? Like we couldn't do that. And so we just hoped with her and tried to support her when it didn't come through. And so she's online and it's been fine. But I do know that in her heart of hearts, like she really just wanted to hold on to that hope. And maybe in the winter, they're saying it might happen in the winter, we'll see. But again, it's one of those things where I think we have to be able to support their dreams and their ideas as much as, there's the pessimistic adult side of us.
Yeah. It's very hard. It's hard to be a balance of like advice and like practical, but also I'm like, I don't want to be a dream killer. And also if I would have gone back and like told my 17-year-old self, the things that I would not have, my 17-year-old self would have told me to go away. Like some things you just have to like live through, and decisions that you have to just live through and make and learn from. And that's also the beauty of this time of life though, is I think that it's a time of life when you're less afraid of like just trying things. And there's part of me that like, I miss that, I miss the bravery that young people have.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's so, so true. There is something poetic about the way that they live their lives, in the sense that, it's emotional. It's not cerebral sometimes. Although we wish it. But yeah, no, absolutely. And it's, she's doing really well for what's been happening, but I do not envy this generation. These are babies that were born. So she was in my belly soon after 9/11 happened, and there's this whole generation that came right after 9/11. There was a little bubble because so many people were making babies.
Yep.
So she comes from this kind of cloud of being in 9/11 and now in COVID and the global, just climate change. It just is ongoing. They've had to live through many things that I wish that they did not have to. And yet they're so resilient. They are so brave. They are ready to change this world. The young activists today, oh my goodness. I am so proud of them. They are out there. They're being so loud and vocal. It's amazing. I'm so grateful that they are activating.
Yeah,
really.
absolutely. When I tell people that I'm a librarian who works with teens, often people are like, oh, teenagers. I'm like, teenagers are the best people like in the world. They're great. They will tell you how it is, and they're full of hope and like bravery. Yeah, I love teenagers.
I agree. No, they're very, very honest human beings. And I applaud. I applaud honest human beings who are willing to just put it out there, be vulnerable, be open, and just willing to take risks and, you know, willing to like fight for the things that they believe in. And I think those are the amazing part about teens and working with teens.
Yeah, yeah.
Yay.
And so kind of speaking about, you know, all of the craziness of the world, I feel like there's been a lot of conversation about trying to be creative in this time. Like, is that something that you struggled with? Do you have like advice or thoughts,
Oh
or
my,
trying to be
because
creative in the world is literally burning around us?
because they're all in my house. I was like, wait a minute, you're in my office. They all settled here. Yeah, it's been really a struggle. Being creative has been difficult. Creative, not in terms of baking, like we've all been baking and making lots of good food, which has been wonderful. But at the same time, just in terms of my own work, it's definitely hard. I think if you're able to kind of escape the noise for a little bit, I'm more of the what do you call it? I guess because I'm a mom, you know, kind of the empath, like trying to gauge everybody else's temperature and making sure that everybody else is doing okay. And so a lot of like my own self-care gets a little bit, it, it just falls back, right? So everyone else needs to be okay for mom to be okay. And then after that, mom can segue into being the writer mom. So that has been a little more of a struggle now that everybody's been home. But so Vermont has been really safe, knock on wood, for the most part.
Yeah.
And so my little one and my partner, they've all gone off to work. My partner's a teacher, and my little one is in fifth grade. So Vermont has opened up, and so they've all been going to school. It's a shortened day, but for the most part, it feels kind of normal. So I've been back into the groove of like, oh, the house is my own. It's my office again. So I can start to do some more work, and that's been really wonderful. We'll see how long it lasts. I don't know. How's it been in Chicago? Have folks been back to school?
So school is virtual. Chicago Public Schools are all virtual, which has its own challenges, certainly. But and through I think the first quarter, so they're going to reevaluate. I think probably coming up. Yeah, it's all just everything's like this is the way it is right now, and we'll see what happens, and
It's,
everyone's just
I
trying to
think
adjust.
I think that's so much smarter. We have some family in New York and Brooklyn, and they have been going back and forth about the school. And Jackson, my nephew, he's been told he's going to come to school for months. And his mom, Juliet, who's a doctor, his mom is like, no, it's not happening. Like, you know, the whole like, this is reality. But Jackson so badly wants to believe that school is going to happen. So he's been like pushed off. But they say they're going to open. Who knows? It's just, I think it's much smarter to just say, this is it. This is what it looks like.
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, I think there's points where they're gonna reevaluate, but it's just, yeah. So we only have a couple more minutes, which is sad because it's such a delight to talk to you. But so I have two kind of final questions for you. So what advice would you give to young writers, and particularly to young writers who are immigrants, who were not born here?
I think one of the biggest things that I've learned as growing up as an immigrant is that I feel like there's a tremendous amount of responsibility that we feel towards our family. And I don't want to downplay how important it is to respect and honor your family, but I think it's so important to also respect and honor your dreams. And one of the things that I talk about a lot when I am in school visits is that your dreams are so vital. They are so important. And sometimes it means you have to fight with your family about it. And sometimes it means that you have to have really difficult conversations with people, you know, whether teachers, siblings, parents, all those things. And I think the thing that you can't let go of is that you have an idea, a vision, a truth in your heart. And that is the thing that you have to really, really honor and hold deep and just have faith. Like it's so vital and important that you have faith in yourself. And it's hard. it is so hard. There are many ways that that faith gets shaken, but you surround yourself with people who care, who want to hear you, who support you. Find those people, make them part of your lives, honor and treasure them. It will allow you to become the person that you have always meant to be.
Love that. Love that. And then my final question is, what books are you pumped about right now?
Oh gosh. Well, we're reading a couple different books for my MFA program, and that I got to read for National Book Awards when I was on the judging panel last year. And I adore Patron Saints of Nothing, Randy Rebay. Oh my gosh, amazing. I love him. Doing a lot of verse novels because I write in vignettes and things like that. So lots of wonderful verse novels like Poet X. And Bridge, oh my goodness, Padma's book, The Bridge Home, amazing, beautiful. My partner, and I'm going to do this for him because he loves this book, Inner Chinatown by Charles Yu, which is an adult book, just made the National Book Awards finalist list. It's phenomenal for like an Asian American book that's smart and snarky and funny. So those are the books right now that I'm thinking of. Ocean Vuong's book, oh my gosh. His novel, amazing. Ocean Vuong. He got the Genius Award last year. His novel is just gorgeous. On Earth, We're Briefly Beautiful. Okay. Just an amazing, phenomenal, poetic book. So those, I'm like, plug books. Those are the ones that I love.
I know, and I was springing. Like, I should give you warnings so you can like.
Oh no, I have tons of books that I would love to recommend. Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Oh, love it. Well, this has been so lovely. So lovely to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And it was so much fun to talk with you, Alex. I feel like we're friends now. We could just be like Zooming all the time.
I know. We should just like do this. This should be a thing. Yeah. So for those who are watching, because I keep forgetting there's people watching, join us next week at the same time, 4:00 on Wednesday. And next week we'll be chatting with Veronica Roth, who is the author of the Divergent series, and her most recent adult novel is called The Chosen One. So until then, stay safe and keep reading.